Hello.
Hi! We're doing our group project on toxic minerals, and I'm Zeynep.
I'm Kimos.
I'm Matt.
And I'm Emily.
And the toxic minerals are, like, we describe them as minerals which causes toxicity when you consume or like inhale it.
And we're going to be talking about asbestos, cinnabar, and silica.
Now these three minerals interact in interesting ways in the various spheres that we have on our Earth. In their raw form, these minerals are all naturally occurring in the lithosphere, which is where we extract them from. In the hydrosphere, there's not huge concentrations of any of these minerals, but there is a concentration of mercury, which comes from cinnabar. In the atmosphere, we can also find asbestos and silica dust because of their ability to go airborne. And all of these minerals make their way into the biosphere, most notably through humans, but also through wildlife, which also face the consequences.
Yeah, this topic is really important to understand and study and learn about because these things could be in your household or workplace, and a lot of these settings have different forms of these minerals. It's vital to understand the threat they can play on human and ecological health when exposed to them. So we're going to throw it to Zeynep right now to have a more thorough introduction as to what these three minerals are and where they're found.
Hi everyone. Right now I'm on front of the Earthside building and we're going to talk about some toxic minerals. So not forgetting the fact that any excessive consumption of any mineral can cause toxicity. We picked out some specific minerals that you should look out for. The first one is we want to talk about is asbestos, which is a really common mineral. Asbestos refers to a generic name given to 6 types of naturally occurring fibrous mineral. Its formation depends on local geology and environmental conditions that are rather common in the world, so you can find it worldwide, but right now it's mined in China, Russia, and Kazakhstan. The other mineral that we want to talk about is cinnabar, which is rather like a classic one because of its mercury content. It is a form of a mercury sulfide and has a bright scarlet to brick red color, and it forms in rocks surrounding volcanic activity. You can still find it worldwide, but it's essentially more common in the areas with volcanic activity. And the last mineral that we want to talk about, which is like a rather surprising one for me, is silica. Silica is found as quartz, mostly quartz in nature, and you can basically find it everywhere. You can find it in soil, sand, concrete, and granite. I mean, when I say granite, I think about the kitchen counter. So you can find it in your kitchen, I don't know, like in crystal shops, in your jewelry, everywhere basically.
And we're back in the mineralogy lab right now.
That was a great introduction for the three toxic minerals. I had no idea that they were found all over the planet. That's really interesting.
Oh yeah, definitely agree. And I have a geology joke for you guys. You want to hear it?
Yeah.
Do you know like why the rock was so cheap?
Why?
Because it was on shale. That sounds so stupid.
Alright, speaking of that, I think we should move on to the uses for these minerals. So let's head over to the engineering building and I'll talk about that.
That sounds great.
Here I am in front of the engineering buildings where I'm going to talk about some of the uses of these minerals. Silica is heavily used in construction and is used in everything from concrete to glass to even ceramics. 95% of the supply of silica is used to make concrete. Silica is also a very popular food additive, where it's used in everything from from dry foods to pharmaceutical pills to apple juice and even beer and other alcohols. This is kind of creepy, but silica is only toxic as an aerosol, so it makes sense that it would be used in this way. Moving on to asbestos, only 3 industries in the Canadian economy use asbestos, This is the military industry, the nuclear industry, and the chloroalkali industry. The chloroalkali industry is a process where brine, which is regular table salt in water, is turned into lye and chlorine gas, which are very useful commodities in our economy. Asbestos is used as a membrane that prevents unwanted reactions to happen. Cinnabar is the next mineral that I'm going to talk about, and it doesn't really have any good uses on its own, but when it's made into mercury, when it's refined into mercury, it can be used in the chloroalkali industry to prevent the formation of chlorine gas through electrolysis. Mercury is being phased out of the chloroalkali industry because it has huge toxicity to wildlife and to humans, but it's still being used because of the great energy savings. Mercury derivatives are also a super important shelf stabilizer for vaccines, but they are being phased out due to public worry and because it's often used as ammunition for anti-science pressure groups. Okay, now we're back in the mineralogy lab.
Yeah, I didn't know I was consuming all these minerals every day.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy how many everyday products these toxic minerals are in. Would you like to hear a geology joke?
Sure.
Why do geologists tell old jokes?
Why?
Because they dig them out.
Oh my god.
All right, moving on from that, we're going to now talk about some of the health effects behind these toxic minerals over at the MedSci building.
Okay, let's head out.
We're in front of the MedSci building right now, and we're going to talk about some health effects of toxic minerals. So toxic minerals can get into your body through inhalation or ingestion. This can happen over a long period of time, or it can happen over a very short period of time. The effects can be chronic or acute. The worst diseases that can result in exposure to these minerals include neurological disorders or cancer, but the mechanisms behind these diseases are still unknown. Exposure to asbestos is related to inhalation, and it can cause asbestosis, which is the formation of scar tissue in the lungs, and mesothelioma, which is a cancerous tumor in the lining of the lungs, as well as lung cancer, which are cancerous tumors in the bronchioles of the lungs. Chrysotolite is most commonly associated with asbestos-related illnesses, when crocydolite is less commonly related and it's more dangerous. Symptoms include chest pain, shortness of breath, and tightness in the chest. The next one is silica. Silica is exposed through ingestion. Exposure can cause silicosis, which is inflammation and lesions in the lungs, as well as autoimmune disorders and chronic renal disease. When cinnabar is ingested, it is exceptionally toxic, and the effects are irreversible. And it can lead to birth defects, brain disease, and kidney damage, and it can even lead to insanity. It's very important when working with unknown minerals that you're wearing proper PPE. And you always have to make sure to wash your hands and you don't touch your mouth. You don't want to go around licking rocks. So now we're going to talk about an instance, a case study where some people were exposed to a toxic mineral and the health effects as a result of that.
Long-term exposure to crystalline silica is toxic and is linked to an increased risk of mortality and lung disease, such as cancer and tuberculosis. A 2004 case study observed that granite miners working in Vermont who were exposed to large amounts of silica dust with little to no protection had an increase in cases of lung cancer. This study compares the impact of exposure on workers before and after dust control, which directly correlates silica exposure to lung disease. Indeed, post-1950 exposure was significantly lower to pre-1940 exposure because of new protective measures put in place. The jobs that did not involve huge exposure were office jobs, so like draftsmen and designers, and these workers were far less impacted. Another case study that was conducted from 1998 to 2002 in Eastern Europe and in the UK had similar observations. It selected a large group of workers whose jobs that were mostly mining jobs would expose them to silica dust, which came mostly from quartz. And the results of this study indicate that approximately 4% of lung cancer cases came from exposure to silica.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Mineralogy Lab for the final time. We're going to go through and we're going to talk about the most interesting thing each of us learned in each of our topics that we discussed today.
Yeah, I'll go first. I thought the quartz being one of the toxic minerals was kind of interesting, even though it's just the dust of the quartz that causing the lung cancer and inhalation disease. But it's like still interesting, I would say.
Yeah, I found pretty interesting that since one of the studies was pretty recent, it means that we're still mining all of these toxic minerals.
Yeah, I found it really interesting that even though scientists don't know the mechanisms behind how toxic minerals can cause cancer, they still can identify the cause without actually knowing the mechanism. So I thought that was pretty interesting and a cool area for more research.
Yeah.
And I just found it really interesting how many everyday food items and stuff that we use contain quartz. Everything from like apple juice to concrete to glass.
Yeah. Okay, well, thanks for listening to our podcast. We appreciate it.
Yeah,
Bye.
thank you guys.